Hi, I'm here with Carol Fredrek, who is a psychologist in Calgary, Canada. And I'm Nancy Forster, who the executive director of the National EFT Training Institute in Canada. And Carolyn and I are here today to have an informal conversation about a case study, a compilation case study. This isn't an actual client of Carol's, but a case that she's put together to show us how she uses EFT in the process of therapy with her clients. Thank you, Carol. I so appreciate your time being here.
Yes, I feel very honored to be able to present this.
Oh, that's great. So would you give us a brief summary of the client and of the presenting situation for this client?
Right. And as Nancy mentioned, this is a compilation of clients that I've worked with, and that's to maintain their confidentiality. So the client, Sharon, she's 35 years old, female, single, with one child who is 6 years old, and she's revealed several patterns that has caused her a great deal of stress. She recognizes a generational pattern of alcoholism, distance between siblings, family abuse, and she herself didn't experience abuse, but witnessed emotional abuse. And as a result of that, grew up fearing for her life, so a real panic.
Mm-hmm.
So when she entered therapy with me, described having panic attacks, so met the criteria for panic attacks, generalized anxiety, and experienced a lot of distress regarding her shape and size. So one can say body image, but it was clear as she was describing it that it was much deeper than general body image challenge.
Mm-hmm.
She really yearned to have a relationship with a partner, but didn't feel worthy of love, and talked about not trusting men. So that's what she brought.
So this is right from the beginning, you're understanding that this is a fairly complex situation
Absolutely.
With this client. So then how did you use EFT in the first phase of your therapy with her, to create kind of greater safety in her body, stabilization in her life? How was EFT used, and was it helpful?
Well, I think, what is critical to any good therapy is taking the time to build rapport. So clearly she didn't feel worthy of love, and she didn't trust men. So she didn't feel worthy, and she didn't trust in relationships. So that was real critical for me to establish in the relationship between the client and myself, in order for her to feel confident in my work with her using EFT.
Right.
So rapport building was key, and through the rapport building occurs through starting from the first session when you're getting some history, and so we probably spent 3 sessions gathering history while I was listening. Yeah. So that she felt understood. She felt that what she had to share was important, and that I, in fact, heard the emotions underlying that. And then clearly recognizing this was fairly complex. And through the history gathering, which we did using a genogram and a timeline, I was able to get a good sense of what brought her to where she is today.
And I know some therapists would use tapping, sort of a very basic form of tapping, bronze standard, really, to even in that conversation as you're taking the history, understanding that person in front of us is probably already in some level of hyperarousal. Did you consider that, or did you decide to use that, tapping, talking conversation, or decide to leave the tapping till later with this client?
Well, with this client, what we did within the second session, is talk about EFT,
Mm-hmm.
and then talk about the EFT EFT tapping,
Right.
that people hear about to manage stress. And I find that sometimes that's helpful for clients, so the bronze level.
Right.
So that was an approach. Then practicing the EFT in the session was also a self-soothing technique. So this is a way that we could, in the first few sessions, bring down some of her panic, and not take it away,
Right.
bring it down. So we talk about a window of tolerance.
Right.
So,
right.
When she would become overwhelmed or anxious, let's just bring that down and come back to that window of tolerance.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I like about EFT is that as the client has that experience, right, of coming from that overwhelm or hyperarousal back into their window of tolerance, it's empowerment. It's
Yes.
like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I could exercise such control over my experience.
Exactly. And someone with the level of trauma and the type of trauma she experienced, that was really critical. So as with with trauma survivors, is that there's a sense of helplessness, powerlessness. They've tried lots of things and they haven't worked. So to have a tool, and talking EFT as a tool,
right.
which the actual work goes much deeper, and one can't do on their own.
Absolutely. And so being able to teach EFT as that self-help tool and encourage and support the client to be doing that between our sessions, we get a totally different nervous system coming into the next session.
Exactly. Right. And there's a sense of confidence, as you said, Nancy, a sense that I do have the ability to cope differently, and a sense of confidence in the therapist.
Right.
EFT in the therapist.
Right. And to your speaking about the importance of the relationship, right?
Yes.
I think that really has a positive impact on the relationship between client and practitioner, as the client feels that elevated confidence and competency.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they're not in such a dependent situation, closer to the beginning of therapy.
Exactly.
So it kind of impacts on all different levels, I think, is what we're saying.
And in some cases, I know we're talking about this particular case study, but in some cases, depending on what I've learned from them about their history and their coping skills, I think, as you mentioned, is if there's a sense of almost desperation, like I need to get this under control, is that one can perhaps use EFT to work with that sense of desperation.
Right.
Working with it very carefully.
Yeah,
and so that's a way of bringing, having the client move to a place where you can go deeper.
Yes, exactly. And so with this client that we're talking about, as it became clear that she could more reliably manage her own nervous system, so there's greater safety and stabilization, then you started to go to the deeper work.
Yes.
And I know that you did some work with the panic attack issue.
Mm-hmm.
How did you bring EFT to provide service in that area?
Well, one of the frameworks that that is part of EFT training, and that I start with, is what is referred to as the pyramid of aspects.
Yes.
And what I like about that approach is, what is the current, the present distressing issue, so the presenting issue. So for her, it was an issue or a panic attack that occurred not too long before she entered therapy, when she was in an unfamiliar surrounding environment. And so what we were able to do, because as we know, is that there are aspects of a memory, particularly with a panic attack, that we dissociate from, that are not that they have a dissociative disorder, but that's a natural kind of response. Oh my God, this is too overwhelming for my system.
Absolutely.
So we lose the image, we lose the thoughts, we lose some of the emotion, all that we can identify as I'm overwhelmed, like it's I'm flooded.
Right.
And so the pyramid of aspects allows the therapist with a client to break that down. So that presenting issue, to break it down. So what's the image? Tell me what that picture looks like.
Right.
What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What do you feel in your body? So the body sensations. What emotion do you feel? So what's emotionally? So when you bring up the image and the body sensation, what is the emotion? And then so that the client is able to, and the therapist, to have some objective answer. What's shifting is rating that. So what we talk about, subjective units of distress.
Disturbance or distress, exactly.
And then what was going on in your head? What were you thinking? That reflects how you see yourself as a person.
Right.
And rating that and being able to hold that together. And so it's breaking it down, and it also gives you and the client information as to what parts are more disorganized or dissociated from that experience.
Because there could be many aspects in that pyramid of aspects that do not have energetic disturbances associated with them.
Yes.
But we're looking for the ones that do, because we want to find them and sit right on top of them in order to be able to clear that specific energy disturbance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so once we looked at the presenting issue and broke it down, we and with that that image or that situation, and we began. I think what's important and what I find two aspects that I find very powerful in this approach is, one is you're not leaving the client to their own. It's when they're doing the tapping to de-stress, they have a cue word and so forth. But when you're going deeper, your role as a therapist is to hear what's coming up and to find language that is consistent, but might be slightly different than how the client is framing it.
Right.
And being able to, and the client not needing to share exactly what's happening. Which I've had clients, and in this case, the client felt relief.
Yes, exactly.
Particularly as other issues come up and other situations come up for them.
Yeah, it's interesting, in some cases, the therapist doesn't actually even need to know specifically what happened on a cognitive level.
Absolutely.
The client can use sound, they can use all kinds of different ways to communicate the energy disturbance and then to be clearing that together. So what I'm hearing you say is that you used EFT on a specific incident, a specific event that happened, and you worked on all the different aspects of her relationship with that event, how she experienced that event, particularly the ways that were keeping her in distress around that specific event.
And that's what I think is really important. And she didn't have a lot of difficulty doing this. Some clients do, is that, how does this feel now?
Right.
Not because you need that body experience, that experience in the here and now, not how they remember it was, but it isn't present for them. And then one has to work more with the client to get to a place where those those emotions, those body sensations are in the here and now.
That's right. They're available to them, and they can actually experience them in the body today.
Yeah, exactly. And there are, EFT provides different approaches depending on what the client presents with and how the work moves.
Right.
So with this client, one of the approaches telling the story.
Right.
Was really important for her to go through the story of what happened, and then having her tell it, and then having her let one know when it's distressing, and then begin to do some EFT.
Yeah.
And I hesitate to say EFT tapping because it's not just the tapping. The role of the clinician, of the therapist is really critical. Their knowledge,
really critical. Yeah. And their ability to simply hold the space for that person to have the intensity, the truth of their intensity.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of what the therapist is providing, is their own ability to be stable and feel safe even as their client is experiencing the intensity of that trauma.
There certainly has to be, and I feel I've worked with trauma survivors for a number of years. I've not heard all imaginable stories, but I've seen, and I think that's really important. And with this client, could see that she could tolerate more than some other clients. So needed some tools, needed some other approaches. And it took time because it wasn't just one, we talk about generalizability.
Yeah. Yes.
Generalize.
Yes. Yeah.
A desensitization or a working through a core issue, but you can work through one core issue and another one may emerge.
That's right.
And
because we're all connected, as we're understanding more and more, right? We are a system where all the bits
exactly. And I think, as we've talked about before, there's a readiness. So initially, it's with any psychotherapy, but there's a readiness. So the person's ready to do this work, and there may be a block. So you may need to work with the block, and maybe there needs to be some skill building, or there need to be some other self-soothing techniques as you go in deeper.
Yeah.
And so it isn't a 1 or 2 session. I mean, I've seen clients get some relief.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about complex trauma, or trauma-informed therapy, is that it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely, and the pacing is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
So, I could talk to you all day about this, but let me ask you the last question. So overall, how would you describe the results for this client using EFT?
Very positive. Where the client was able to, when I say cope, not just cope, but not be triggered situations that they had been previously. So those situations are similar situations, not a trigger. Not that the panic attacks had gone away, but there was still the anxiety and issues around body image. And so we're still doing some work, but there's no question that the client is able to self-regulate, has the tools for that, has worked through blocks and the underlying issues that they weren't able to in other therapy approaches.
Right, exactly. So, I hear you saying that they have a greater resiliency around the events and circumstances of their lives, such that they're not getting triggered as often, and so greater possibilities probably opening for
going
them.
back, and something that I find very helpful to do in therapy is at a certain point where, when we're in the midst of doing the work, it's hard to see that there's been any shift or change. And so at certain points, going back and looking at what the presenting issue was and what their goals were, and have those been met.
Right.
And so now, what are their goals?
Yeah.
Because those shift as they've done work. And I know personally, when you're in the midst of doing work,
Right.
it doesn't feel like anything has changed. And so that was really helpful with this client, because it felt like there's still more to do. Well, where have you come from?
Right.
And now where are you wanting to go?
Now where are you wanting to go? Yeah.
Wanting to go, on their journey in a way that they wouldn't have dreamt of a few months before.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's a wonderful place to end, right? Being able to go on their journey in a way they wouldn't have dreamt of a couple of months before. Oh, thank you so much, Carol, for that. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time and your work.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Okay, take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.